Welcome to Grandma Has ADHD, where attention deficit doesn't retire when you do. I'm your host, Jami Shapiro, sharing stories and laughs about ADHD in our wonderful senior community. Whether you're a grandparent discovering your neurodivergent sparkle later in life, or someone who loves a grandmother who can remember every detail of her wedding day, but not where she put her glasses, this podcast is for you. Join me for aha moments and celebrating the beautiful chaos of the ADHD brain at any age. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And for more daily doses of connection and community, come join our vibrant Grandma Has ADHD Facebook group, where we share stories, tips, and maybe help each other find those missing glasses together. Hi, and welcome to the very first solo episode of Grandma Has ADHD. This is something that I have been fighting doing because it's a little scary to put yourself out there and not have someone to continue the conversation and the banter. Not only am I doing it solo, but I'm also doing it with no filter. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you get to see the video, you will see that I am sitting in my 16-year-old daughter's bedroom. She has the best internet reception in the house, so that therefore has become my podcast studio when I am not able to record in the studio that I use. And because she has ADHD, you get to witness, the true backdrop of what goes on. I am a proud mother of three, two of whom have ADHD. And interestingly, my middle has OCD. She's actually been kind of staying here, and that's the sleeper sofa that is really too uncomfortable for her to sleep on. But anyway, so I just thought, one of my soapboxes, if you will, is keeping things real. So I'm like, there's no filter, there's no virtual background. This is really who I am. One of the things that I advocate for is being our authentic selves. When you have ADHD, sometimes it's too hard for me to lie. I have a strong sense of justice, so lying is a problem for me, but I can't remember a lie if I tell it. So it's easier for me just to speak my reality, but I also am very much if I am a real me, then you get to be a real you. And we show up warts and all into this world, and that I hope makes me relatable. And when you hear, what I share, you'll understand that it is coming from a very real space. So I am recording this episode on just to date everything because I expect that one day I am going to be, I'm going to declare that one day I am going to be the thought leader on seniors with ADHD, and I am going to be advocating for seniors and what ADHD looks like and reducing the stigma. I feel like it's been reduced a lot in the younger generations, but the boomers and the silent generation, they are not quite as open. And I even know among my peers, I'm Gen X, there are some people who don't like to, quote unquote, be outed with their ADHD. And as I share, it is something we should be proud of because most of us, I didn't find out that I had ADHD until my mid 40s. And so I had to build systems and compensation around my ADHD to succeed in life. And if you were able to succeed in any way, whether you graduated from college or you didn't graduate from college, but you're still standing here resilient, then you should feel proud. And you should wave that freak flag. So I thought about what it was I wanted to talk about today on this first episode. And again, I don't have anybody out there to go with, but I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about New Year's resolutions, especially as it relates to ADHD, because again, tomorrow when this podcast drops, hopefully, if everything goes the way it's supposed to, a lot of people see New Year's as a refresh, as a clean slate, and an opportunity to change the things that we're doing. I had a great conversation recently. I was telling somebody that I'm actually turning 55 in January, and that is the age where all of a sudden you can live in a 55 and over community. And I noticed even on studies that a lot of times
I actually was just at the International ADHD Conference, and the study ended at age 55. And so I feel like it's a really good time for me to be out there. Although I'm not technically a senior, I'm kind of coming into that age group where we are dismissed a little bit or negated. And so anyway, I'm going to go back, which, that's a hard thing for us ADHD people to do, is remember, where was I? I was talking about New Year's resolutions. So first and foremost, this is where I was going. So I was telling this man at a party that I am turning 55 and he was 60, and we were talking about ages. And he said, you're not turning 55. He says, you're just a minute older. And it was such a good way of looking at life, because really what distinguishes 54 from 55 is just a minute. And we need to stop really shaping those definitions. I know I don't feel, not that I know what 55 feels like, but I feel like I did, when I was in my 30s. And actually the best shape of my life was in my mid 40s, when I could do yoga every day because I wasn't having joint pain. So going into a new year really is just a new minute, and we can change anything that we don't like anytime in our lives, that we don't have to wait for New Year's. But the one thing that I have really learned from doing this podcast is how much that voice in our head really plays with our emotions and how we feel. And I think if you pick up nothing else from this podcast, which I hope you pick up a lot more than that, you will pick up that we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to give ourselves grace. We need to treat ourselves as we would a friend. One of my favorite books, actually not one of my favorite books, but one of my favorite thought leaders is Michael Singer. I loved The Surrender Experiment. I did not like The Untethered Soul as much, but he actually talks about that voice in our head as a roommate. And he says, if you can separate that voice in your head out from you and think of it as a roommate or a friend, would you be friends with that person? And if you are not treating yourself kindly, then you have the choice, right? And so we always are at choice in how we talk to ourselves. So going into the New Year's, if there's something that you don't like, you don't have to, especially with ADHD, it's hard to follow a lot of rules or so set one thing at a time. For me, I decided to create an intention for my year. And I thought about, what word would it be that would really change the way that I'm doing and help me focus? So my word for 2025 is going to be abundance. I tend to come from a fear mindset sometimes, and what I want to do is focus on knowing that the universe is going to provide, and I don't need to worry so much about, one of the things, for instance, is I won't give somebody information, or a competitor, I don't want them to know something that I'm doing because I worry that they're going to take my idea. And if I came from a place of abundance where there's enough for everybody, what's meant to be for me will be for me, then maybe I would loosen up a little bit. So that's really going to be the word that I try to focus on this year. So be thinking about a word that would help drive you forward. Another thing that I have done is I have started a 30 Days of Gratitude Facebook community. For me, I definitely am aware of the fact that first of all, when I have accountability and other people doing something with me, I'm much more likely to stick to it. So here's a funny story about me. I am almost 10 years since I separated from my ex-husband, and 4.5 years into the relationship that I have now. But in between my separation and meeting my current partner, I was out there single, doing the online dating thing and getting very discouraged. And what I decided to do was create a 50 First Dates Facebook group. Not because I wanted to go on 50 dates, but because I didn't want to keep quitting. And I knew that if I did it with community, then I would be more likely to stick to it and it would be more fun. And I have to say, there were a lot of relationships that came from that group, and they will credit me, which I also love praise. And then think that's another one of those ADHD traits. When you have so many things that you feel ashamed of, you tend to crave praise and positive reinforcement. So I definitely loved that there were a lot of people who credited my jumpstart into them getting into a relationship. And it was nice for us to do it as a community. I will tell you that I did not meet my partner in the 50, but it definitely kept me going. One of the things with ADHD is we very much like competitions and gold stars. And I definitely put that 51st dates into that column. So going back to gratitude, because I didn't forget where I was going, I do like to jump around. So we are doing a 30 days of gratitude challenge, because what happens is at the end of the day, you're going to write down the 3 things that you're grateful for. And what that does is it helps you focus your attention on the things that you are looking to see so that you can record them. So we're going to pay attention to those things rather than the negative things. There was a great book, one of my all-time favorites by Jami Shapiro, is You Are a Badass. And if you haven't read it, it's probably one of the best self-help books that I have read. And she does this exercise where she says, okay, I want you to set the timer for 1 minute, and I want you to count everything you see that's red. And you start the timer and you look around and you count all of the things that's red. And you come back to the book and she says, okay, now count the things that were yellow. Right? We weren't paying attention to the yellow, so we didn't see the yellow. So when we focus on gratitude, it is going to elevate us. And I thought that was a really good way to start the year. And another thing that I will tell you, if you have ADHD and you are listening to this, and even if you don't have ADHD, you just think I'm funny and you wanted to tune in, we do very well with goals. So for instance, clutter, as you can see behind me, tends to be a problem with people, not all people with ADHD, but a lot of people with ADHD. I know for me, if I know that I have company coming over, then I go into that mad dash to make sure my house looks good. And so I'm very motivated by the idea that I have a project to finish by a certain time because I'm going to have people over. And so give yourself a goal, come up with an event or something that you have to look forward to. And, especially the holidays are so hard if you're like me and you love the lights and the parties and the food and that time of year where we're seeing family and we're seeing friends. There's a letdown and we go into January. So coming up with something to look forward to will also help in the new year. So that is my advice for coming into the new year. And when we come back, I am going to give you my top observations from the International ADHD Conference and from my months of recording this podcast, some highlights that I've learned. And I would say one of the best things about doing this podcast has been that although I am enrolled to become an ADHD coach and I'm already an ADHD specialist, I am getting thought leaders on this program who are sharing their hacks and their journeys. And I am able to absorb what they share. And I'm going to come back and give you some really great tips to take away. So just join me when we come right back. If you are listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you or a loved one is feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of ADHD or disorganization. Since those of us with ADHD tend to struggle with where to begin big projects like moving or home organizing, the Silver Linings Transitions team can guide you through the process, breaking tasks down into manageable steps or handling every detail. There's a reason our team carries magic wands when we work with our clients. We can pack and move your entire home and you won't have to miss a day of work or touch a single box. We also provide home organizing and storage shortouts with an understanding of ADHD. If you have a home to sell, we can provide you free or discounted services when we refer you to one of our realtor partners through our realtor referral program. Visit our website at www.silverliningstransitions.com or call us at 760-522-1624 to learn more about how we can help you make your move or home organizational project magical. And we are back with the second part of Grandma Has ADHD. We just finished talking about New Year's resolutions and being kind to ourselves. And now I am going to give you a little bit of wrap up of my observations from the International ADHD Conference. And I'm also going to share with you that this podcast has absolutely been a labor of love. And it is something that I had the idea to do it back in January. So now we're going on a year. And then I didn't actually get the podcast off the ground until October. And then as I shared at the beginning of the episode, this is actually the first time that I'm recording on my own. Sometimes people with ADHD get caught up in the perfectionism that if it isn't going to be done absolutely perfect, then I can't do it. And so that desire to be perfect sometimes will keep us from starting. And so I just decided that however this is going to be today, that it is going to be out there. And here we are. So the highlights for the conference, I have to say, one of my favorite parts was meeting Penn Holderness. If you don't know who he is, he and his wife, Kim, they are famous social media influencers. He has ADHD. He's very open about having ADHD, and he is a couple of years younger than me. So they're both Gen Xers, so I can really relate to the content that they're creating. And they actually they became famous on social media when they did in 2013 a Christmas jammies video that went viral. And it's super cute because they did it 10 years later, showing their teenage kids who weren't as cooperative as they were as younger children. But he was the keynote speaker at the ADHD conference. And what he was sharing is that he was the oldest person, or they were the oldest couple to win the amazing race. And he credited his ADHD with being able to win that competition as the oldest couple, because he was able to really laser focus on the projects that were really important to him. But I remember that I was actually at lunch one day and I saw Penn Holderness at a table, over a couple tables away. And initially I had a friend that I had just met at conference take a picture of me pointing to Penn Holderness, like, look, there's Penn Holderness behind me. And then I thought, I definitely have learned that we regret the things in life we don't do more than the things we do. And I thought, if I am going to risk rejection in any crowd, I'm going to risk it in a crowd of people who understand me and they've been embarrassed before by the things that have come out of their mouth or the things that they have done. In fact, the biggest comorbidity with ADHD is social anxiety. I actually don't have social anxiety. I have some rejection sensitive dysphoria, which we'll cover in another episode. But I decided to just go up to him, tell him that I was a huge fan, show him that I had listened to his book on Audible, so he didn't think I was just making it up. And he was so gracious. Not only did he take the selfie with me, but he took the selfie. And I felt so good that I had the courage to do it. So when I got to hear him speak, I loved that he addressed the crowd. He started with a knock knock joke, which I thought was, let's see if I can remember it. So it's, again, the room is, I would say 85%, 90% full of people with ADHD, and it's more than 1,000 people. So he starts his keynote like this. He says, knock, knock. And the audience says, who's there? And he says, ADHD. And then the audience says, ADHD who? And then he completely changed his subjects. It was really funny. And everybody in the room sort of got it. And he talked about some common experiences that he had. But I would say one of the most important things that he said that I loved is he said that if he had been given an opportunity to turn off his ADHD, if there was like a button, like that easy button on Staples to turn it off, he said he would have turned it off when he was in school, and he would have turned it off when he was in high school. And in college, he said his mother, he realized, was his Ritalin. He was not medicated at that point. And he said when he got there and he didn't have his mother helping him along, that's when he went on medication. And he said, and that's when this creativity, he has this ability to make songs out of everything. And he said the songs went away. He said he continued to stay on Ritalin through college because he needed that. And then he opted to go off of medication as an adult. But he did say that if he'd had the opportunity as an adult to turn off that ADHD and have that easy button, he said he wouldn't opt to do it. And I will say that I am consistently finding that is the case with adults who do have ADHD. Most of us, including me, really find the benefits and the gifts in having ADHD. But one of my absolute favorite quotes is Dr. Ned Hallowell. I want him on my podcast. So if you know him, you're listening and can help me out. And here's my little shameless plug. But he says that having ADHD is like having a Ferrari brain and bicycle brakes. And, it's my brain, it goes like so fast. And I need to learn to pause. And that's one of the highlights that I got from Corey Whitland's interview. She really talked about the pause and mindfulness. So if you haven't heard that podcast, you need to listen to that one. Actually, that one's going to be coming up forward because I haven't released it yet. But it was a great, great episode. She talks about having an ADHD parent, being an ADHD parent, and having ADHD herself. So that pause is really important because our brains are going. And so being able to slow it down. And then she talks about, going down the path with one decision, in our brains. Is that the path I want to take? What happens if I choose that path versus I go this other way? But when we stop to make those decisions and think about the consequences, that, can have a big impact. One of the things that I have learned about ADHD, and one of the reasons that I'm such an advocate, not only of seniors with ADHD, but people who will be seniors with ADHD, is that we are so focused on now or not now. So we're dealing with what we're dealing with in this moment, and that becomes what's important, that we don't focus on what's going to be coming down the line for us. So how that shows up, for instance, for seniors who now have had reached that age of 65 and over, they may not have planned effectively to be seniors, to be retired, because they weren't thinking about the fact that their lives were going to change from the moment that they were in. So maybe they didn't plan financially. Maybe they haven't gotten their ducks in a row. They haven't executed the documents that they need to execute. Just a real life example for me and what ADHD looks like in now and not now is, I'm flying through my life and I spill something on the floor. Now, I'm going to say this: if it's a liquid, I'm going to pick it up. But if it's like, just something dry and prior to having a dog in the house, I didn't have to worry about it, I would just move on to the next thing, because I didn't want to stop to focus on, taking the 2 minutes to clean up my mess. But really eliminating the word later is really important to clutter, and it really helps us to manage our lives. And so I'm a very big advocate of future Jami. So I talk about this a lot in my podcast because I think it's helped me more than anything, is that I now know with certainty that even something that I am sure I am going to remember, I am going to forget. I know I'm going to forget it. And so now I plan to forget it. And I don't even give myself an option that I'm not going to remember, that I'm going to remember, because I know I'm not. Now I really just know. And I don't beat myself up over it. I just plan for it. So if I make an appointment and, for instance, I'm going to a potluck, I use this example a lot, but it's such a good way to remember for me. I'll write in where the potluck is and what I signed up to bring. Otherwise, I'm going through and spending more time trying to remember what it was that I said that I was going to bring. I do the same thing if I sign up for tickets. I immediately put the tickets into my Apple Wallet, or I forward it to my boyfriend because he's more responsible than I am. And I'm just like, okay, I'm setting myself to find it. I had an incident last weekend where I had gotten tickets with friends and I could not find the tickets anywhere. And I know I didn't get the QR code, because if I had gotten the QR code, I would have sent it to him. But I started to get into a panic because I couldn't find it. I couldn't remember who I'd ordered the tickets from because I'd gotten them on Facebook, and I had to bring my friends in. And then eventually my boyfriend wakes up and I'm in a panic. Now it's an hour that I've been looking for these tickets, and I was embarrassed. And, I didn't have to be, because he was able to think really clearly. He didn't judge me. He figured out where we had gotten the tickets from. We found the receipt and we were able to track them down and go to the website. But I made it a much bigger deal than it needed to be. And had I gotten the tickets, I really don't think I did, then I would have been able to immediately put them where they belong. So anytime I make a reservation, I save it to my calendar, and I just plan to know that future Jami is going to be happy because I really thought about past now. Some of my observations also from conference were how many people had purple hair. That was like the consistent color. I thought that was so funny. I loved being in, a crowd of people who I felt understood me. And the language was, very common language. I remember Penn Holderness asking the audience how many of us had done some sort of performing arts or music or art in high school. And like the majority of people raised their hand because we tend to be more creative. I jokingly said it was like letting your freak flag fly. It's like, here I am. And I loved, the variety of how people dress. There was a lot of LGBTQ. There were some emotional support animals. And it just felt great to be in a room full of people who didn't judge me. I also, one of my favorite things, and I may have said favorite things a lot, but that ADHD, when you go to a conference and you wear a name tag and you have your schedule of events, they actually gamified the conference. So everybody got a QR code, and every time you met somebody, you were supposed to scan their QR code. And then they kept an ADHD Quest scoreboard. I think I came in the 30s of 1,000 people. And I'm going to say this, if I had known, I would have scored higher because I would have been paying attention from the beginning. But I love that they gamified the conference. And that's such an ADHD thing to do, is that competitive nature. I also loved that the closing ceremony, they had 2 different events. They had a DJ and dancing, and then they had a quiet room and games. And that really speaks to, I've said in many of these podcasts, if you meet one person with ADHD, you meet one person with ADHD. I have 2 ADHD friends who are perfectionists, actually, very high achieving, But they always, both of them always have to have a goal or the next thing that they're working for. And so one of my friends just keeps getting college degrees, and now she's going to be working on her PhD, and she's just always improving. And she has a child with ADHD and a child with OCD. And another friend of mine who is the mom of 5 children, she's always like challenging herself, and she has a schedule that she just goes. And it's interesting that you can have ADHD and you can look so differently. So those are some of my observations. I didn't know what masking was, and I learned that term at the conference, which is like, for instance, when I didn't want my boyfriend to know that I couldn't find the ticket and I act so competent or like I have it all together. Or for instance, me having a virtual background on this podcast on my green screen, if you're watching on YouTube, that is masking. It is like not being authentically who we are or holding it together so much. It's like that duck on the water. You see that smooth surface and then behind it's all paddling. The talent show of the ADHD conference was amazing. The talent that was up there was just like the things that people could come up with so quickly. If you've never been to a talent show filled of people with ADHD, then you are missing out. So that was, and then another thing is people with ADHD, we are not the most patient people. We don't like small talk. That is, to use Penn Holderness's term, borcher for me. I don't want to sit there and have a pretend conversation about the weather with you. I want to get real and real fast. And I definitely found that I loved being able to do that in a room full of people that I didn't have to explain myself. But waiting in line, that's torture. Waiting for anything is torture for me. So I'm talking about some of the other things I've learned on the podcast that also tie back to the conference. I think one of the things that I've liked best about the podcast is that like every guest that I've had has gone through that feeling of shame around, maybe not fitting in or being a misfit or not being able to keep it all together. And I love the creativity that I see. Heidi Eagleton was a wonderful guest that I met at conference, 76 years old when I met her. And she had more energy than I did at conference, but she went to, and I'm going to butcher what college she went to. It might've been, I think it was Columbia Law School, but she couldn't even initially get into undergrad with her SAT scores. And she was able to convince the college to let her in despite those scores. And then she was able to get a job practicing law, even though I don't think she did well on the LSATs. Like she just was always figuring out what she was good at and using her strengths and then working around the system. And I think MacGyver is a great example of someone with ADHD. And I don't know if the character was supposed to have ADHD. I have actually never really watched MacGyver, if I'm being honest. I just know he's always coming up with some like really crazy gadget or something to fix a problem. And that definitely reminds me of what having ADHD is like. But the guests that I have had, when you meet these people, first of all, every time we have a conversation, we have so much in common. And when I talk to them, I'm like, wow, these people are amazing. And so one of the things that I am really trying to do is open the eyes of anybody who has ADHD, who might have ADHD, about rather than being ashamed of it or feeling like we can't really celebrate who we are naturally, when you talk to these people or you meet these people or you hear these people, you're like, they're pretty cool. And I want to be in that club. So, and, I definitely find in working with seniors that vitamin C connection is critical. So this is another tangential story, but I remember I was walking the streets of, I think it was LA with my daughter. My daughter was, I guess, 14 or 15 at the time. And we saw a group of homeless people as we were on the streets in LA, which is not an uncommon thing to see. And you see them sitting in a circle. Now there's weed for sure, because we can smell it, but they are, laughing. And I kept walking with my daughter, but I pointed out to her, I said, did you notice that even these people who were homeless on the streets had smiles on their face and they were laughing? And she said, yes. And I'm like, that's because they had community. And no matter where we are, there is something to that misery loves company. And not that I am saying ADHD is miserable, because as I've already shared, people have said that they love it, and nobody that I met would trade it in. As an adult, definitely they might have in high school or in school. Actually, I'm going to go on another tangent. So I'm going to come close to the camera and I'm going to show you that I have a face. There's no filter. I have had no work done on my face, and I have very few wrinkles. I had horrible acne as a teenager, and it was embarrassing. I was teased for it. I had to go on Accutane, And it was hard to be a teenager when your face is what people see first. And we didn't have the makeup that we have now. And now I think that oily skin really helped my face to preserve. So I will just say that, we now having that ADHD has given me a superpower because I have more energy than most people my age. I think I have more creativity than most people my age. And so I think we all have to face things in our life. It's just when we face them and how we adapt to them. And one of the other great things about ADHD is resiliency. I had Dr. Ken Druck on, who I think faced one of the hardest things you can possibly face, and that was the death of a child. And he has gone on to be a thought leader in the grief space. And he goes on and he counsels other people who've dealt with losses like Columbine and Sandy Hook. And he was gracious, wonderful podcast guest who he also believes he has ADHD. Again, you're talking about a whole generation of people who were not diagnosed, but he has an ADHD grandson and it's heritable. So, and another really fun thing that I learned was the term from Wilma Fellman, squirtle. And that was such a great description. Squirrel is a term that we use a lot with ADHD because, I'm talking to you and then I look out the window because there's a squirrel or I forget what I'm saying and I lose focus in squirrel. So I always thought of squirrel that way, but I didn't think about the fact that squirrels kind of pounce from thing to thing to thing, which happens when you have ADHD. And she actually said that she feels like her spirit animal is a squirtle. And the squirtle is the part squirrel, part turtle. And this is so true for me. I am usually one of the first people to get it to an event. I'm excited to be there. And then I hit my wall and I need to close up and be done. And I actually had someone comment about my personality that I'm always like one of the first people to leave because he had observed it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just honoring my energy and I'll give it all to you. And then I've given it and then I have to take it in and just retreat. So I am really excited about what's going to come in 2025. I have some amazing guests. I have some amazing things I want to do. Another thing that I'm going to just manifest out into the universe is I have an interview to go on the entrepreneur show, The Blocks, which is BLOX. Although I am the founder of Silver Linings Transitions, which is really how I got into this whole space. Grandma has ADHD in the community that I want to build, the project that I am going to take onto the blocks when I get cast. And for future Jami who is listening to this episode, I am so proud of you for taking the leap and going on by yourself and showing you don't have to have a guest to record good content. I am appreciative to all of you who are listening and appreciate the trust that you're putting in me. I am not a doctor, but when you have ADHD, you may know that you tend to have a special interest in something. And my special interest is ADHD, and it is really just, I feel like it is getting the instruction manual to my life and who I've been and how I am. Even like I learned that people who have ADHD sometimes have a hard time with left and right. I still struggle with that when I'm putting my contacts in. I'm like, which is my left, which is my right? Anyway, I appreciate you listening. I hope that if you set an intention for your new year, that you give yourself the grace to be who you are and don't set yourself up for failure. Be kind to yourself, be kind to other people, and have a wonderful 2025. And just know that my mission is to make the rest of your life the best of your life. The opinions expressed on Grandma Has ADHD podcast are those of our guests and hosts and are intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. This podcast does not provide medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content discussed in this episode is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The host, guests, and producers of Grandma Has ADHD do not assume any liability for the content of this podcast. Listen at your own discretion.